Hello, everyone. Tonight, we will step into the world of a legendary queen, Cleopatra. She was not only a symbol of power, but also the embodiment of sharp intelligence, ruthless cunning, and a charm that made history itself sway. Her love stories and political intrigues still spark debates among historians today. If you truly love thrilling historical tales and want to explore every mystery, hit like and subscribe to the channel right now. Then turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment. And don't forget, leave a comment to let me know where you are watching from. I'm always curious to meet viewers from all over the world. Now, turn off the lights, play some soft music, and join me on the mysterious and powerful journey of Cleopatra. Cleopatra II not only inherited the throne, she also inherited a bloody and tragic legacy, a family where power and hatred became daily sustenance. The Ptolemy family, also known as the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, but for them, order and sobriety seemed like luxuries. They claimed to be Greek gods turned into Egyptians, a legitimate game until they began to apply their insights excessively, marrying within the family. Continuous sibling marriages made the family tree look more like an endless spiral cake than a family chart, and as a result, many generations of rulers possessed emotional stability that was almost non existent. While most Ptolemy members merely fumbled between power and intrigue, Cleopatra emerged as a remarkable exception. Intelligent, multilingual, and only slightly wounded by family feuds, she grew up in Alexandria, a commercial and cultural hub that today could be likened to the Las Vegas of the ancient world. The palace was a convergence of luxury and chaos. Marble corridors, golden statues, and countless rumors enough to build a long running series. But outside, the Library of Alexandria held a treasure trove of knowledge admired by all humanity, where every scroll and inscription recorded the history and intellect of the world. Her father, Ptolemy XII, nicknamed Orytes, known more for his flute playing than his leadership, was the vivid embodiment of failed rulership. He handed over power, money, and even Egypt's reputation to Rome to retain the throne, while focusing only on music and bribing Roman officials. For Cleopatra, observing her father was like watching a failed political experiment, but she also learned an important survival lesson. Sometimes leadership is not about fairness or morality, but about adaptability, observation, and knowing when to bow, when to smile, and when to pretend to be conquered. From a young age, Cleopatra observed how her father manipulated Rome and handled internal rivals, learning to grasp every detail of the power game. When her father exiled opponents and sought to maintain influence through bribery, Cleopatra realized that weak but survival savvy rulers held long term advantages. She learned that to govern a nearly collapsing kingdom, the crucial factor was not mere military strength, but the ability to turn every move into a life or death strategy. By age 14, she was wise enough to know how to flatter priests, quote Aristotle, and recognize when a party or a drink carried hidden dangers. All these skills became essential tools in a reign where murder was sometimes a political connector and betrayal a necessary skill if one failed. While her siblings were preoccupied with power struggles and feared losing the throne, Cleopatra saw an opportunity, a kingdom rotting from the inside out, waiting for someone talented enough to turn chaos into strength. When Ptolemy XII died, the throne was left to Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII, who was only about 10 years old. The Ptolemy family, lovers of power and complex relationships, quickly turned the division of power into a complicated mind game. Cleopatra, trained in languages, mathematics, and diplomacy, soon realized that her brother and his advisors did not see the value of a strong queen. They wanted a puppet, a king easy to manipulate to continue ruling through advisors. But Cleopatra, with her sharp instincts and resistance to manipulation, refused, and from that point, an internal family struggle began. Exiled, Cleopatra did not retreat. She used her time outside the palace to gather loyal forces, connect with allies, and hone political strategy. Half tragedy, half comedy, half civil war, all painted a picture of instability where a single wrong decision could end her life or power. Alexandria, meanwhile, became a grand stage of politics and intrigue, where every painting, coin, or decree bore the mark of the power struggle between royal siblings. In this context, Cleopatra realized that the number of soldiers or resources was not always the key to victory. She needed a symbol, a powerful external figure to leverage. And when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 49 BC, a golden opportunity arose. Caesar, the powerful Roman general who had just escaped Rome's civil war, became a crucial pawn in Cleopatra's plan. She understood that if she could win over Caesar, the throne would once again belong to her. With intelligence, ambition, and sharp strategy, Cleopatra began mapping out her path back to power, the first step on the journey of turning exile into a springboard for a glorious reign. After the legendary moment on the carpet, Cleopatra not only captured Julius Caesar's attention, but also turned it into the ultimate weapon of power. No longer an exiled queen, she became the center of Egyptian politics, where power and intellect created an allure stronger than any army. She realized that in the game of the throne, appearing at the right time, in the right way, and to the right person was more important than any sword. Caesar was not a man easily manipulated. Having conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and overthrown the Republic, yet Cleopatra made him pause, both astonished and curious, as if she had opened a completely new world in just a few seconds. In the early days of their meeting, Cleopatra did not show weakness or plead. She approached Caesar as an equal partner, a leader who understood Rome's ambitions far better than many local officials. She proposed the stabilization of Egypt, loyalty, and a politically beneficial alliance. But behind those words lay a calculated initiative. Cleopatra recruited Caesar, not with love, but with intellect, political charm, and strategic vision. Every word, every gesture was deliberate, aimed at building trust while simultaneously consolidating personal power. Caesar, a man who had faced countless geniuses and fools, found in Cleopatra a novelty he had never experienced, a political genius with sharp instincts and far-reaching vision. She made him listen, reconsider, and even change his perception of power. In secret meetings amidst torchlight and the whispers of the palace, Cleopatra demonstrated that strength did not come solely from armies or titles, but from the ability to control information, image, and the emotions of one's counterpart. When Caesar officially entered the palace as a mediator, Cleopatra became the true power holder. The schemes of her brother Ptolemy XIII and his faction, who thought they could manipulate the throne, were quickly overturned. Alexandria became the center of a tense political arena, where every wall, coin, and decree reflected the fierce battle of wits between factions. Cleopatra, from a position of exile, rose up, turning every threat into opportunity and every danger into a stepping stone to power. When her brother's army entered the city, Cleopatra and Caesar coordinated with precision. Her troops were not only strategically deployed, but inspired by intelligent tactics, leaving the opposition unable to respond. Ptolemy XIII, who had never understood the true value of strategy in politics, quickly failed. At 21, Cleopatra not only reclaimed the throne, but also proved that preparation, intellect, and confidence could overcome even overwhelming forces. After the victory, the relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar deepened in the form of a political alliance. For Cleopatra, this was not a romantic love story, but a perfect strategic partnership. She maintained power in Egypt, protected the kingdom, and provided Caesar with the support necessary to consolidate Roman authority in the region. This collaboration created a mutually beneficial alliance in which power, strategy, and diplomacy were perfectly combined. With Caesarion, the child born from this alliance, Cleopatra not only strengthened her position but also created a political symbol, a royal lineage connecting Egypt and Rome, serving as both a testament to power and a diplomatic lever. The ancient world could hardly deny her talent. Cleopatra, from an exiled girl, became a divine queen in the eyes of her subjects, a powerful mother, and a symbol of a new dynasty. She wielded a power both flexible and firm, knowing how to balance politics, media, and diplomacy, turning every action into a comprehensive strategy. While Caesar returned to Rome to face the consequences of the civil war, Cleopatra continued to consolidate power in Egypt. She was not only a beautiful ruler, but also a talented manager, reducing taxes, expanding trade routes, overseeing Nile management, and ensuring the court operated smoothly. Every action she took was calculated to enhance personal prestige and strengthen political power, earning both Rome's respect and caution. Cleopatra also cultivated her image as a living deity, the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, a symbol of power, wisdom, and protection for her people. She learned Egyptian, a language previously scorned by Greek dynasties, and used it as a powerful political tool. When speaking publicly, she needed no translator. With confidence, intellect, and sharp eyeliner, she won the trust of her people. The palace, from golden statues to glittering marble floors, became a stage for her to display power, turning every action into a message of wisdom and authority. By combining strength, intellect, and public image, Cleopatra transformed politics into art and herself into a living legend. Rome could underestimate her, but the Egyptian people saw in her the perfect combination of queen, goddess, and mother. Every decision, from governance to public appearances, reinforced her power and image, making Cleopatra not just a ruler, but a symbol of timeless authority. With keen insight and strategic talent, Cleopatra proved that true power was not merely military might or weapons, but the ability to shape perception, build trust, and use every element, from politics and image to culture, as the most effective tools. She not only reclaimed the throne, she created a dynasty, a legend, and an enduring lesson in power, intelligence, and political wisdom. In the brilliant light of Alexandria, Cleopatra was no longer merely a queen, but the center of a universe built from power, strategy, and legend. Every action, from the gold-plated barge gliding on the Nile to lavish feasts blending divine rituals with extravagant celebrations, was a declaration of authority and wisdom. Cleopatra understood that true power did not come from armies or titles, but from the ability to influence perception, combining intellect, image, and the emotions of those around her. She was rewriting the concept of power, not only ruling Egypt, but also conquering the imagination and attention of the world. Mark Antony, an impulsive man, passionate about war and wine, was, for most intelligent women, a dangerous game. But Cleopatra saw opportunity in his impulsiveness and pride. She knew that Antony's strength lay in his excessive confidence, belief in his combat skills, and far-reaching vision of Roman honor. Yet he lacked emotional restraint and subtle political wisdom. She turned those weaknesses into advantages. Through intelligence, charm, and perfectly orchestrated performances, she not only influenced Antony, but also directed the war against Octavian according to her will. The meeting at Tarsus exemplifies Cleopatra's political genius. She sent no emissaries, no dry reports. She came herself, making everything symbolic. A gold-plated barge, purple sails scented with incense, musicians playing in rhythm with each step, servants fanning fragrance, and Cleopatra reclining under golden curtains embodying Isis, the Egyptian goddess, symbol of power and immortality. Every detail, from light to scent, from color to rhythm, was calculated to leave a profound impression, forcing Antony, who had faced thousands of enemies, to acknowledge this was not merely a diplomatic encounter, but a religious experience, a demonstration of Cleopatra's timeless authority. When Antony stepped onto the barge, all doubts, skepticism, or prejudices about Cleopatra vanished. He no longer saw a foreign queen, but a perfect symbol of power, intelligent, proud, alluring, and capable of balancing personal authority with her partner's interests. Cleopatra understood that Antony could not resist this allure, and she used it to protect Egypt, ensuring maximum power and influence. She did not love Antony romantically. She loved power, control, and the ability to shape a kingdom's destiny through a perfect alliance. In the following days, the relationship between Cleopatra and Antony developed in a way both strategic and dramatic. Every feast, every excursion, every public declaration was a message. Egypt was power, Cleopatra was a goddess, and Antony, though Roman, could not deny her influence. At the same time, Cleopatra ensured that every move reinforced Antony's political career. His army was nourished, his campaigns funded, and his influence amplified through the queen's power. This relationship was a perfect symbiosis where power and wealth, intellect and strategy merged to achieve maximum results for both. However, in Rome, their image was distorted into a story full of suspicion. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, quickly turned Cleopatra and Antony's relationship into propaganda. Antony was depicted as an enchanter, Cleopatra as a cruel queen, and Egypt as a threat to Rome. These rumors spread rapidly, influencing public opinion, creating political pressure on Antony, and forcing Cleopatra to carefully calculate her next moves. Yet Cleopatra did not panic. She knew that Rome could ridicule her, but they could not control what happened on the Nile, in the palace, and in the hearts of the Egyptian people. Cleopatra continued to consolidate power by combining military strength with cultural influence. She managed the fleet, coordinated the army, maintained food supplies, and continued to expand trade routes. Every coin, every painting, every feast was a PR strategy, reinforcing her divine image, generating respect and devotion, while emphasizing that Egypt was an independent, wealthy, and formidable kingdom. Cleopatra turned life and politics into a stage where every citizen, official, and general became an audience in the power drama she perfectly directed. While Antony was enthralled, Cleopatra maintained strategic vision. Love was optional, power was survival. She saw in Antony the only man capable of protecting Egypt from Roman ambition, while also serving as a strategic partner in executing military and political plans. They operated as a perfect alliance, with Cleopatra shaping strategy and Antony executing it, creating a partnership both powerful and dangerous. This relationship went far beyond romantic love. It was a combination of power, strategy, and political creativity, a symbiosis that most leaders only dared to dream of. And amid lavish feasts, divine rituals, and displays of power, Cleopatra maintained absolute control. She understood that power was not merely armies or titles, but the ability to influence perception, build trust, and maintain influence. Her image, crafted down to the smallest detail, became a living symbol of authority, commanding respect and admiration from her subjects, economic partners, and political allies alike. While Octavian in Rome built public perception against Antony and Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen remained busy protecting her kingdom, maintaining influence, raising her children, and using allure, intellect, and strategy to keep Antony bound to her. This relationship, simultaneously a political alliance, a military collaboration, and a public spectacle, proved that Cleopatra was not only a beautiful and charming queen, but also the greatest strategist of her era, who knew how to transform love, power, and legend into an undeniable tool for survival. And that was Cleopatra's true genius. She turned power into art, survival into legend, and every action into a living declaration, making Egypt the center of authority, myth, and reverence, while Rome could only respect and fear her, powerless to control a woman who knew how to shape the world according to her will. Cleopatra knew that ultimate victory did not lie in naval battles or treasures, but in controlling the narrative. While Antony sank into despair and wine, she focused on what remained: image, influence, and spiritual power. Alexandria, though shaking under Octavian's invasion, was still her stage. She moved throughout the palace, examining every statue, every coin, every relief, ensuring that everything told a single story. Cleopatra was not merely a defeated queen, but she was the one still in control even in defeat. The queen organized her final audiences like performances of power. Soldiers and officials, wavering over which side would survive, were invited to witness every gesture, every word. Each emphasized that Egypt was a kingdom to be respected, not a plaything in the hands of Rome. Cleopatra did not need Antony to do everything. She had learned to operate politics, strategy, and legend without relying on any man. Her relationship with Antony had taught her that passion could be a tool, but decisiveness retained power. As news of Octavian's advance approached, Cleopatra did not panic. She had prepared. Treasures were sealed, her children hidden safely, and an escape plan had been devised with such finesse that even the invaders would struggle to grasp it. Cleopatra did not rely on luck. She anticipated, calculated, and even turned limited time into an advantage. In her mind, death was not failure, but part of the ultimate strategy, the final performance of power, ensuring that history would remember her in her own way. Octavian entered Alexandria with the full might of Rome, believing that as long as she lived, Cleopatra would be prey for his glorious victory. But Cleopatra did not act like a frightened woman. She welcomed Octavian with grace, wearing dazzling royal attire, head held high, jewelry sparkling as if he were receiving a favor from her. Instead of a humiliating surrender, Cleopatra turned her presence into a statement. Even under Roman occupation, she remained Cleopatra, powerful, divine, and unconquerable. At the same time, she maintained contingency plans. Even if imprisoned or faced with threats, Cleopatra had prepared an escape route known only to her. No outsider knew all the details. This was no longer mere politics. This was strategic artistry, where image, emotion, and power merged to create the perfect drama. Every action, from sealing treasures to arranging envoys, was calculated to impress while ensuring survival. While Alexandria remained silent and uncertain, Cleopatra remained at the center of the story. Every rumor, every judgment, from Antony's despair to Octavian's pride, was within her control. She knew that Rome needed a living Cleopatra, as a symbol, as a propaganda tool. But she would never allow herself to become a mere pawn. The queen understood that true power lay in shaping perception, and she wielded this authority fully. In the following days, Antony gradually realized the difference between her and Roman strategists. He, once great on the battlefield, was now merely the man beside a woman who held complete power. Cleopatra did not need him to survive. She needed Antony as part of the performance, a piece in the grand picture of power. Antony, in his despair, still saw her as the only one who could save him from his own corruption and from history. This contrast, her strategic and in control, and him passionate but indecisive, created a profound tension where power and emotion intertwined dangerously. Finally, Cleopatra decided that the performance of power could not last forever. When rumors of Antony's fake death spread, she knew it was time to act to preserve honor, power, and history. Cleopatra chose death on her own terms, a dazzling, mysterious masterpiece, complete with authority. Not humiliation or fear, but a way to transform defeat into a spiritual victory, to become an eternal symbol in the eyes of the world. When Antony died, Cleopatra held him in the gold-adorned palace, where everything had been prepared like a grand drama. She wept, yet remained composed, mournful yet calculating. Every detail aimed to preserve power, maintain image, and safeguard her own legend. This was the final symphony of love, power, and politics, where Cleopatra proved that even in defeat she remained the queen controlling the story. Finally, Octavian entered Alexandria, bringing Roman army and authority. The city, once the heart of Egypt, was now an empty stage, with statues, gold, and treasures sealed. But Cleopatra remained unshaken. She had prepared for every possibility, from treasures to political options, ensuring that even if Rome triumphed, she would succeed in shaping history. In the world of power, the final image mattered more than any battle, and Cleopatra, with all her wisdom, charm, and pride, turned death into a declaration of eternal authority. And that is the difference between Cleopatra and any of her enemies. They fought to conquer. She fought to write the story. When the fleet disappeared, Antony died, and Rome entered Alexandria, the queen still held control, not by military might, but through intellect, audacity, and the ability to turn every action into a symbol. Cleopatra, in the final hours of her life, remained Cleopatra, indomitable, powerful, and a living legend that no one could erase. In the cities of the Crusades, where blood and faith intertwined, everything seemed arranged according to a strange rhythm that only insiders could understand. From Jerusalem to Antioch, narrow streets were crowded with weary soldiers, dust covering their cloaks and the scent of incense mingling with sweat and parched earth. Under flags embroidered with crosses, knights prayed while exhausted from weeks of fighting, lost between faith and fear, between salvation and curse. They sought comfort in the simplest ways: the warmth of a woman, a bit of wine, and a place to cast off the tension of recent bloodshed. These places were not chapels, they were brothels, tolerated and even quietly overseen by the religious authorities. Here, morality became a delicate game. The church, which condemned desire, ultimately exploited it. The women, mostly from Greece, Syria, or Armenia, were regarded as instruments of penance and control. They were confined, served, and forced to exist within the contradictions of male power and religious necessity. When a knight committed crimes on the battlefield, from looting to murder, a visit to the brothel and a confession at the tribunal could secure salvation for his soul. This system turned sin into a form of currency. Desire was taxed, repentance became a service, and both spiritual and material treasures flowed into the church. Every Saturday night, the spiritual market was as busy as a fair. A soldier might pay a small sum or offer a candle to atone for a night with a prostitute. Greater sins, such as murder or betrayal of allies, required higher contributions, sometimes with an extended confession. Priests, now both spiritual advisors and accountants, recorded every transaction, balancing sin with grace. Forgiveness became an economic product, a way for religious power to turn desire into a manageable and exploitable cycle. Notably, it was the Crusader knights themselves who enjoyed the convenience of this system. They lived in constant fear of death and damnation, but learned to negotiate with fate. A quick confession after a bright moonlit night could purchase temporary peace, and even violating moral codes became an opportunity to assert personal power under the guise of religion. Outwardly, they wore crosses and cloaks. Inwardly, they were men negotiating with their own souls. The contrast between form and substance became everyday life. A man could kiss a relic on the altar and hours later give his body and loneliness to a woman enslaved in the brothel, both acts legitimized by doctrine. Sin was not erased. It was exploited, taxed, and arranged into a sophisticated economic cycle. The clergy knew this cycle would repeat. They had seen thousands of knights from Acre to Tyre return to the same endless loop: sin, confess, atone, and sin again. They even joked that a soldier needed two women and a confessor to balance his week, an open secret everyone understood, but few admitted. Yet behind all these strange arrangements, there was a hidden logic of power. The church protected itself by turning desire into a series of services. Money from confessions, from small offerings to brothel taxes, flowed into the treasury, used to build churches, repair hospitals, and maintain relics. What outwardly appeared as sin became the foundation of the church's existence and authority. A system where desire was not eliminated but managed, taxed, and renewed ensured that dependence, both spiritual and material, never ran dry. In this context, Cleopatra emerges as a strikingly contrasting figure. The Queen of Egypt, with power and cunning, knew that controlling image, narrative, and wisdom could surpass military strength. Just as Crusader priests exploited penance to consolidate authority, Cleopatra knew how to turn death, defeat, and treasure into tools of eternal power. She did not surrender to Rome. She created a legend that Octavian could not dictate. Even if Egypt fell, the story of the last queen lived on, as proof that true power lay not in the sword or army, but in intelligence, strategy, and the ability to write history on one's own terms. Looking back at the scenes of Jerusalem, Acre, or Antioch, one sees a world where morality and desire, power and forgiveness, sin and salvation intertwined in a rhythm both tragicomic and practical. The system was imperfect yet effective. It controlled powerful men, exploited helpless women, and ensured that society functioned according to subtle rules recognized only by those with vision. Meanwhile, Cleopatra from Alexandria learned to apply the same logic, turning everything into a tool of power, transforming failure into legend, and turning death into a declaration of immortal authority. And that is the crucial difference. While the church and knights negotiated salvation, Cleopatra negotiated with history. One side used faith to govern, the other used intellect to become immortal. In both cases, power lay in shaping perception, one through sin and grace, the other through story and legend. From this perspective, Cleopatra's death was not defeat, but a spiritual victory. She proved that when you control the narrative, no conqueror can ever fully defeat you. In the intricate tapestry of the Crusader cities, where the flickering light of oil lamps spilled over narrow streets and sand dust followed the footsteps of knights, the lives and power of the women inside the brothels were often overlooked, yet they played a crucial role. They were not characters in chronicles nor featured in holy texts. They were silent shadows, the unseen economy, the links maintaining balance in a system both sacred and pragmatic. Some crossed the Mediterranean from refugee camps or distant lands, seeking survival and opportunities to position themselves in an all-male world. Others were war captives, Greek, Armenian, Syrian, or Muslim women taken as spoils of war. Once in the grasp of the Doi sect, escape was nearly impossible. Their value was measured in coin and confession. They were expected to comfort Christian knights, yet in the eyes of the church, chastity and piety were idealized concepts rarely attainable. No priest truly granted absolution to protect them. They were instruments of trial, embodiments of living temptation. In the red light district of Acre, the brothel was designed as a separate area where each room was a microcosm of desire and power. The night air was filled with laughter, singing, incense, and wine, mingling with the scents of sweat and human skin. Prostitutes wore crosses on their sleeves, not as a sign of devotion, but as a symbol of ownership. They were the church's property, managed and protected like valuable livestock. Bishops issued strict hygiene decrees. Women had to bathe in cold water under supervision, ready for the nights, but also to maintain the symbolic purity of their image. Yet, even within strict regulations, women found narrow paths to reclaim power. They whispered gossip to priests, begged favors from drunken knights, or secretly accumulated small amounts of money to exchange for minor freedoms. Some sought faith privately, praying to saints who had suffered, including Mary Magdalene, the patron of those oppressed by men and restored through endurance. To these women, Mary was not merely a saint, she was a mirror, proof that even in the most oppressive environment, self redemption and wisdom could exist. Their stories were rarely recorded, but their silent presence shaped the moral landscape of the Crusades, softening the harsh edges of war with humanity, even when treated as disposable. In a land obsessed with sanctity, desire, and power, these women became the center of paradox. Knights and priests claimed to protect virtue, yet it was the women who held the power. Under one roof, they lived close together, separated only by a curtain, a prayer, and a handful of coins. If the brothel was the body of war, confession was the soul, and the priests were the keepers of both. They lived in impossible contradictions, both guardians of morality and experts in impurity beyond any knight's understanding. The confessional became a silent battlefield where not swords or spears, but secrets and human psychology were the weapons. Knights with stern faces and heavy armor shed the burdens of desire, killing, and sin in the confessional. Priests listened, weighed, and decided whether to grant forgiveness, balancing power, finances, and human souls. A knight who sinned excessively not only threatened his own soul, but also impacted the revenue from his contributions. Therefore, many priests became pragmatic, turning divine law into moral arithmetic. Desire was a lesser sin than doubt, adultery less dangerous than heresy. One recorded priest said, "Better to lie in a warm bed than face cold faith." Such confessions both controlled sin and created a strange intimacy between warrior and priest. Chronicles reveal that many priests were caught visiting brothels they publicly condemned, citing the salvation of souls. Temptation did not stop at cloth or doors. In Rome, distant clergy sent letters reminding of purity, but in the Levant, purity was a myth. Desert winds dusted sacred robes, and priests became system maintainers rather than paragons of holiness. When disease or war claimed lives, they buried those whose sins they had heard too much, praying for the darkened souls. The power of confession became a public market of secrets, built not to purify but to maintain efficiency. Every absolution was met with another sin awaiting, planned, forgiven, and valued. Pilgrims, knights, peasants, and merchants all flocked to the Holy Land seeking redemption, yet it was the ports, brothels, and women who provided comfort after years of hardship. In Jaffa, Tyre, and Acre, taverns doubling as brothels appeared alongside pilgrimage routes. The journey of purification became a test of temptation. Exhausted, sunburned, and fearful pilgrims, selling possessions, enduring storms, and walking where Christ had walked, found solace only in human touch, negotiation with desire, and occasionally the priest's immediate absolution. The church accepted this paradox, as pilgrimage generated profit. Every confession, donation, and offering kept the wheel of faith turning, transforming belief into an endless cycle between sin and redemption, desire and power. When Western knights set foot in the Levant, they brought with them ideals of virtue, piety, and the concept of fighting for Christ. But exposure to Byzantine and Arab cultures altered every norm they had known. In cities like Antioch, Tyre, and Acre, desire was not hidden. On the contrary, it was regulated according to subtle rules, where pleasure became a natural part of social life. Crusaders, raised in cold stone castles and icy chapels and rarely witnessing public bathing, music, dancing, and conversations about love, found this display to be a powerful enchantment. They began to understand that longing and sanctity were not always opposed. Sometimes they coexisted, creating a spiritual experience that was both complex and practical. The brothels of the Levant gradually became sites of cultural intersection. Knights were captivated by women from Armenia, Greece, Moorish lands, or Arabia, who not only had appealing appearances, but also knew the hymns by heart and could feign piety when priests appeared. This strange combination of physical beauty, religious knowledge, and cunning made them centers of hidden power, as well as the comfort sought by weary warriors. Veils embroidered with crosses became a dual symbol, both a mark of sin and an emblem of salvation. On many nights, confession was no longer merely an act of penitence, it became part of the ritual, a means of balancing desire and virtue, amid a world of warfare and the warm lights of Levantine nights. By the 12th century, the boundary between Crusader warriors and pleasure seekers had become so blurred as to be almost unrecognizable. Jerusalem, Acre, and Tyre were both battlefields and centers of pleasure. People fought for heaven by day and bargained with hell by night, wrapped in silk, and by morning returned to confessions where sins were valued and forgiveness became a receipt. From this emerged a sophisticated economic system. Confession was no longer purely a spiritual obligation, but a medium of exchange. Each sin had its own value, each act of indulgence a receipt, and each act of penitence a potential profit. The recording desks around the great churches of Acre became centers of this economy. Priests and their assistants closely tracked every payment from knights, pilgrims, and even prostitutes. Confession receipts were sealed with wax signed by the local priest and became proof of absolution, almost like moral currency. A knight who sinned could present a receipt, pay the fee, be forgiven, and sanctified. Theology and economics intertwined into a system both rational and intimidating. This operation maintained the church's power while generating a steady financial income. Money from sin was used to build hospitals, fortifications, feed armies, and maintain social order. As long as sin existed, and it always did, the flow of wealth never ceased. Papal representatives set quotas, expecting each priest and parish to generate a certain amount of profit from confession fees. Confession even became a group activity before campaigns, where an entire regiment could be absolved collectively. The fallen were acknowledged as having purified their souls, and their prior confessions remained valid. For the brothels, their role also became essential. They provided a stable clientele for the church, where money exchanged between desire and absolution circulated continuously. A knight could pay a prostitute one night and bring the same coins to the priest the next morning for absolution. The cycle of sin, spending, confession, and forgiveness became a closed loop, keeping both faith and economy thriving simultaneously. In this context, traditional moral order gradually eroded, and fear of sin gave way to fear of unpaid debts. The church turned human weakness into a renewable resource. Even pilgrims returning to Europe carried not only relics but also experience of a world where sanctity and sin coexisted, where mercy could be purchased and faith occasionally became a transaction. Preachers, including Bernard of Clairvaux, warned that the Levant had turned the Lord's vineyard into a tavern, but such warnings went unheeded. Exhausted soldiers, complicit priests, and the Holy Land seemed accustomed to this duality. In taverns, knights raised their cups, laughed mockingly, and prayed that sin would never end. Locals viewed this hypocrisy as a dark comedy, while Muslim and Jewish merchants exploited to trade silk, spices, and wine, witnessing conquerors pray by day and indulge in sin by night. A historian from Damascus recorded, "Their crosses are heavy, but their desires are heavier." This reality reflected the gradual decay of Crusader ideals. The orders, the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, according to rumors, sometimes ran brothels under the guise of charity. Whether true or not, the story persisted, for it was both practical and fitting in a world where sin and salvation intertwined. Knights saw themselves as righteous, confessing to keep their consciences clean, while at dawn another opportunity arose to sin and be forgiven once more, sustaining the endless cycle of Crusader life. It is said that to realize the garden, Nebuchadnezzar II mobilized thousands of workers, engineers, and farmers. They dug foundations, built terraces, and created secret water-lifting devices so that the Euphrates River could flow upward, watering every plot. These irrigation systems, if the records are accurate, amazed the ancient world, not only because they solved the problem of irrigation, but also because they created the illusion that land and sky were connected by a continuous waterfall. Each garden tier was a miniature world. Palm trees, cypresses, figs, roses, and even fruit trees from Babylon, Media, and more distant lands, planted in harmonious arrangements, providing shade and gentle fragrance. But the garden was not merely a technical marvel. It was a place where love, power, and culture converged. Queen Amidis, according to stories passed down through centuries, spent time in each pathway, inhaling the scents and watching the water meander. For her, it was a link between two worlds, a part of her cold, misty homeland that she remembered, and the scorching desert where her husband's power was displayed. Nebuchadnezzar's love for her became the motivation to turn imagination into reality. The Hanging Gardens, therefore, were not just an architectural achievement, but an expression of loyalty, creativity, and the desire to bring nature into an artificial city. The people of Babylon and later Western pilgrims recorded that when standing within the garden, they felt something beyond the weight of stone and brick. The streams flowing down the terraces, the trees suspended above, created an illusion of movement, as if the garden were breathing, alive. Some historians believe that it was precisely the visual and auditory effects of water that made the garden more famous than static architectural structures. The space became a place for dreaming, reflecting on power, love, and the transience of life. Yet alongside its beauty, the Hanging Gardens concealed the toil and sacrifice of those who built it. Laborers forced to climb high terraces, transport soil, water, and plants from one level to another, enduring heat, dust, and thirst, were the ones who created the wonder. Many lost their lives during construction, but none were recorded. Only the stories of the queen and king were passed down, a silent, tragic testament to the nameless, unseen efforts that produced something extraordinary. The ancient irrigation techniques employed by Nebuchadnezzar continue to amaze modern archaeologists. They have found evidence of large water reservoirs, intricate pump shafts, and channels, demonstrating the ability to transport water upstream at a level unmatched by many contemporary civilizations. It seems that every element in the garden, from water, soil, and plants to wind direction and light, was carefully calculated like a miniature ecosystem. It was precisely this combination of scientific calculation and artistic vision that made the garden a symbol of perfection, both practical and legendary. The story of the Hanging Gardens is also closely tied to political significance. Nebuchadnezzar did not build it merely to please Amadis, but also to demonstrate power and intellect. Anyone who saw the garden knew that the king not only mastered weapons and strategy, but also controlled nature. It became a symbol of perfect authority, combining strength, love, and creativity. Anyone entering the garden could not help but acknowledge human capability and the king's dominion. In later records, Greek and Roman historians emphasized that it was the image of the woman, Queen Amytis, that created the garden's beauty and symbolic meaning. Not Nebuchadnezzar, but the desire to please the queen's heart transformed a barren desert into a lush paradise. The Hanging Gardens became a symbol of the union between love and power, personal desire and public achievement. To contemporary eyes, the story reminds us that every wonder carries the human story behind it, with longing, sacrifice, and emotion. And like all legends, the Hanging Gardens are associated with an unsolved mystery. Even though archaeologists excavated Babylon and found ziggurats, the Ishtar Gate, and city walls, the garden left no clear trace. This turned it into a timeless symbol, a wonder both real and imagined, where the boundary between history and legend blurs. No brick has been found, yet the story, imagery, and sensations persist strongly in memory and literature. The rivers, terraced plots, and imagined upward flowing waterfalls all combine to tell a story of an era where power, love, creativity, and desire met. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, though never directly witnessed, continue to live in human imagination, becoming a symbol of dreams surpassing physical limits, a place where people learn to combine personal longing with collective responsibility and discover that even in the desert, beauty and love can exist. But behind the splendor, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon also serve as a lesson in power, strategy, and respect for nature. If one imagines the towering terraces, the trees suspended in the air, and the continuously flowing streams, beneath those upper levels lies a completely different world. Engineers and slaves operating machines, pulleys, and water conduits, enduring dust, heat, and dampness day and night. Every drop of water reaching the top terrace was the result of intelligence, labor, and boundless patience. No tree, no stream, no flower could exist without being supported by collective effort. In this vision, the Hanging Gardens become a symbol of organizational strength, where the king's power lies not only in force or law, but also in the ability to coordinate people and nature simultaneously. And if Queen Amytis truly existed, she was not only the inspiration for the garden, but also the emotional center of the project. Her image walking among the garden beds, listening to the water flowing, and inhaling the scent of flowers created a space where the personal and the grand intersected. Love, through this garden, became a form of soft power with the ability to shape both the city and politics. A queen remembering her homeland could make the desert bloom, and that story inspired future generations to believe that human desires could surpass physical boundaries, time, and even history. But the Hanging Gardens were not only a symbol of love, they were also a declaration of power and control. By creating nature in a barren desert, Nebuchadnezzar sent a clear message. The king could command land, water, and space. Indeed, the Hanging Gardens were proof that humans could master nature, turning what seemed impossible into reality. Every terrace, every water conduit, every artificial waterfall was a statement of the dynasty's capability for creation and organization. In the eyes of foreign envoys, it was not just a romantic gift, but a symbol of authority, leaving anyone entering Babylon in awe. The significance of the gardens extended beyond politics or personal love. For the Babylonians, nature was always intertwined with divinity. Rivers were gods, mountains were sacred, and trees symbolized life and prosperity. By creating a paradise in the desert, Nebuchadnezzar aligned humanity with the divine. The Hanging Gardens not only delighted people, but also illustrated the harmony between earthly power and cosmic order. Every type of tree, every bird, every stream carried symbolic meaning, from palms and cypresses representing strength to lotuses and exotic plants emphasizing the connection between the lands under the empire's dominion. Modern archaeologists, while excavating Babylon, have found large water reservoirs, pump shafts, channels, and walls, but no direct evidence proves that the Hanging Gardens truly existed. And this adds to their captivating mystery. Was it a real construction or a legend passed down through millennia? Whether real or not, the story of the Hanging Gardens reflects the thinking and imagination of ancient people, the belief that humans could create paradise, that creativity could transform the desert into a living landscape, and that power is measured not only by victories on the battlefield, but also by the ability to command nature. Babylon's irrigation technology, if the Hanging Gardens were real, stands as evidence of ancient ingenuity. Greek historians such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus described pulley systems, conduits, and possibly an early version of the Archimedes screw, raising water from the Euphrates to irrigate the plants. These machines, running continuously, emitted sounds like the heartbeat of the garden. In imagination, that sound was both proof of human intelligence and a reminder that paradise does not emerge spontaneously. It must be built through intellect and ceaseless labor. In this context, the Hanging Gardens became a multi-layered model. Love, power, engineering, divine symbolism, and culture all converged here. Every terrace, every tree, and every stream told a story, from the queen-king relationship to reverence for the divine, to political authority and technical prowess. It was a place where the individual, the community, and the divine met, creating a whole both magnificent and meaningful, transcending the mere building materials. Ultimately, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whether real or imagined, remain a symbol of human ambition, of the ability to combine intellect, emotion, and power to create extraordinary things. It reminds us that every wonder, whether of stone, trees, or legend, is the result of imagination, desire, and collective effort. And for that reason, the story of Amytis, of Nebuchadnezzar, and of the Hanging Gardens endures in human memory, a testament that even in a barren desert, imagination and love can create paradise. And precisely in that ambiguity, on the boundary between history and imagination, the Hanging Gardens become a timeless symbol. They are not merely physical constructions, but places where human imagination and aspiration reach heaven. If they existed in Nineveh under Sennacherib, they would be a testament to absolute power, to the ability to conquer nature and turn the desert into a living palace. If they existed in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, they would be evidence of love, creativity, and royal power. In both cases, the importance does not lie in geography or authenticity, but in the symbolic power they convey, a monument to the belief that humans can turn the impossible into the possible. Imagine a day in the Hanging Gardens. Sunlight streams through the foliage, casting patterns on each stone terrace where palms, cypresses, and lotuses intermingle. The sound of water trickling from artificial waterfalls echoes across the levels, mingling with the calls of birds from distant lands brought here. Underground, engineers and slaves tirelessly operate pulleys, pumps, and water conduits, pushing every drop of water to the highest terraces, each action both a task and a miracle. The sound of machinery, the fragrance of flowers, and the bustling rhythm of laborers create a lively cadence, demonstrating that any paradise requires effort, intellect, and perfect coordination. But the Hanging Gardens extend beyond architecture and engineering. They are symbols of power, a message sent to both divinities and enemies. If Sennacherib built them, it was a declaration that Assyria could command water, land, and space, transforming a barren land into a prosperous landscape. If Nebuchadnezzar created the gardens, it was a message that Babylon could not only conquer territories but also win hearts and minds, turning love into a grand construction. Every terrace, every tree, every stream carries a message: power, creativity, and the harmony between humans and nature. The legend of the Hanging Gardens also reveals how humans handle memory and myth. When Greek historians heard tales of a wondrous garden in the east, they attributed it to Babylon because Babylon was more famous, longer lasting, and better known than the destroyed Nineveh. The story, retold again and again, became a symbol not just of a king but of an entire civilization. Over time, technical details, flowing water, and exotic plants were enriched by the imagination of each generation, creating an image of the Hanging Gardens that is at once real and fantastical, technical and poetic. Here, the blending of fact and fiction becomes a strength. Ancient Babylonians or Assyrians created paradise to assert power. Greek historians celebrated the skill, modern archaeologists searched for evidence, and Renaissance artists painted magnificent depictions. All these influences make the Hanging Gardens a multidimensional symbol, existing simultaneously in history, imagination, art, and human psychology. It teaches that sometimes memory and myth are stronger than physical reality, that a story can outlive constructions of stone and brick. Yet the Hanging Gardens also remind us of the fragility of human power and intellect. If the gardens truly existed in Nineveh, they were buried after the city's destruction. If in Babylon, they only exist in imagination. In both cases, even the greatest constructions can easily vanish before time, war, and disaster. And this creates a beautiful contrast. A wonder may disappear physically, yet live on in ideas, memory, and culture. Every tree, every stream in the imagined Hanging Gardens becomes a symbol of hope and desire. Hope for order in a chaotic world, longing for beauty amid the arid desert, and the aspiration to control nature while still respecting it. People no longer care whether they physically existed, but rather what they represent: the human ability to turn dreams into reality, to transform love into power, to make imagination a legacy. And precisely in this ambiguity, the Hanging Gardens become a school for humanity. They teach that architecture, engineering, art, and politics can merge to create the extraordinary, that creativity, nurtured by desire and courage, can transcend all natural and historical limits. They also remind us that no matter what physical creations are destroyed, human imagination and memory possess eternal power. When modern visitors arrive in Babylon, they find no Hanging Gardens. Instead, there is silence, ancient bricks, remnants of walls and palaces, and an empty space swept by desert winds. Yet that very silence invites imagination, sparking the desire to construct paradise in the mind, to envision flowing waters, verdant terraces, and the mysterious sounds of ancient pumps. Each generation adds a new layer of meaning, a new color, a new story to the Hanging Gardens. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whether real or not, stand as a testament to humanity's undying aspiration. They transcend history, becoming a living legend where love, power, engineering, art, and imagination converge. And perhaps what makes them greatest is not the number of trees or irrigation techniques, but the ability to connect past and present, turning an ancient story into eternal inspiration. Each generation, from ancient Greece to the Renaissance, from modern archaeologists to today's history enthusiasts, participates in recreating the Hanging Gardens, proving that a wonder does not need stone or brick. Sometimes living in human imagination is enough to become immortal. Rome, with all its grandeur and severity, was not only the center of power of the Roman Empire, it was also a stage where desire and the divine intersected. In the darkness of cobblestone streets and vast plazas, another world existed. A Rome not recorded in history books, not displayed through monuments or inscriptions, but alive in the breath of its people, in the flickering candlelight, and in the admiring music of the convivia nocturna. Here, power was measured not only by the army, the senate, or the law, but also by the ability to manipulate desire, to control human pleasures and secrets. The night banquets, convivia nocturna, were not merely places to indulge in pleasure. They were a secret political system. A whisper at the table could determine the fate of a province, a trade deal, or even a political faction. Judges, generals, and high ranking nobles, while appearing solemn in the daytime forum, had learned to turn desire into a tool of power. The Romans understood that bodily satisfaction was not weakness, it was a kind of discipline, a method of control. Control over oneself, control over rivals, control over society. The festivities began at sunset, with candlelight reflecting on marble walls, creating a scene both enchanting and dangerous. On carved stone and wooden couches, distinguished guests reclined, enjoying wine mixed with honey, accompanied by luxurious foods, peacock tongues, flamingo liver, fresh oysters, and spices from India and the Middle East. The sounds of the lyre, drums, and flute mingled in the warm space, quickening the heartbeat and immersing every sense in a feeling both lavish and close to the divine. Yet within this opulence, every action carried meaning. A touch of the hand, a kiss shared in darkness, could signify consent for a political alliance, a trade agreement, or a transfer of power. Servants and slaves, those who attended, were not merely decorative, they were part of the system. Anyone who understood the workings of these banquets, the music, the wine, and the unspoken rules, could shape the destiny of Rome. Divinity was present in every moment. Bacchus, the god of wine, became a model for the harmony between joy, ecstasy, and religion. The Bacchanalia, once a reverent ritual, transformed into a week of music, dance, and intoxication, where all rules seemed blurred. But even while challenging public order, the banquets were veiled under religious pretense. In Rome, holiness and pleasure were not opposed. They coexisted, sometimes blending, sometimes conflicting, yet always enriching human experience. The nights also opened interactions across social classes. A noble could offer himself to a meretrices sacra, a sacred prostitute who was not only a lover, but also a conduit connecting humans to the divine. Sexuality became ritual, and ritual became power. The Romans understood that the body was a medium to convey political messages, express love, and even beseech the gods. When a patrician refused to participate in the ritual, it was not only a moral crime, but also a political slight. The lavish banquets under candlelight and the scent of wine were also venues where culture and art shone. Artists, musicians, actors, and dancers were indispensable, transforming each event into a living stage. Walls and ceilings of villas were decorated with frescoes depicting deities, couples, and natural scenes, emphasizing the connection between humans and the divine, between desire and religion. Each painting, each musical piece, each dance was part of the ritual, of power, and of the art of living. Rome taught not only about desire, but also about contrast and contradiction. The next day, those who attended the banquet would still step into the forum, preaching about morality, justice, and discipline. That was Rome, a society where luxury, sin, and virtue existed simultaneously, where the body was a tool, a temple, and sometimes a weapon. This opposition created a subtle form of power that any adversary would find difficult to predict. Yet Rome also reminds that pleasure is not merely sin, it can be devotion, it can be a celebration of life. Religious rituals, Bacchus festivals, and worldly acts all reflected the philosophy that the human body is a means to connect with the divine, a way for humans to experience joy, fear, and power. For the Romans, happiness, desire, and religion were not mutually exclusive. They intertwined, forming the living structure of the city and its culture. Looking at ancient Rome, one sees a complex image, an empire conquering the external world while simultaneously conquering itself and its inner desires. Convivia nocturna were not just feasts, but evidence of creativity, control, and even a sophisticated understanding of human nature. It was in the interplay of darkness and light, between wine, music, and the body, That Rome found true strength, the power of imagination, of belief, and of authority cloaked in desire. And that is what makes Rome a unique case in history. Here, body, soul, power, and the divine merge, creating a civilization that continues to astonish future generations. From the lavish nights, the sounds and scents still echo, reminding us that to understand Rome is not only to read history, but also to feel it with all senses through imagination and human experience, where luxury is not sin but power, and desire is not degradation but a part of holiness. In the city of marble and bronze, where the empire stretched across the Mediterranean, Rome's desire was not merely privacy or amusement. It was a means, a tool, and sometimes a battlefield. The lupinaria, public or discreet brothels, were not only places to satisfy the body, they were political stages, economic centers, and repositories of secrets more valuable than gold. Every coin thrown into the money box was an agreement, every glance exchanged in candlelight was an unspoken commitment. Here, nobles, merchants, slaves, and wanderers alike became equal before the pulse of desire. Within walls covered with frescoes depicting every act, human stories were laid bare. "I am yours for 2 asses," scrawled on a wall in Pompeii, revealed the frankness and practicality of Roman sexual life. No shame, no pretense. For the Romans, intercourse was part of life, regulated, controlled, and sometimes witnessed by the divine. Venus, the goddess of love, had temples adjacent to the Lupinaria as if to legitimize all desires. These places were not merely for selling the body. They were spaces where sex, power, and religion intersected, where a kiss or a touch could shake an entire city in invisible ways. At lavish feasts, senior men and women attended, but in truth, everything was orchestrated by the art of seduction. A look, a gesture, or a smile was measured by political and social strategy. The Romans had learned to turn desire into a weapon. Those who knew how to skillfully influence the desires of others held silent power. Every sexual act could become an implicit contract, and sometimes official or unofficial affairs were recorded in personal histories, affecting advancement, reputation, and even authority. The Romans also created an art of desire. Evening banquets in villas, where candlelight flickered, fragrances mingled, and music intertwined, transformed each moment into a multisensory experience: smell, sight, touch, and hearing all engaged. The body was not hidden, it was displayed, honored, and sometimes even became an ornament of power. The skills of seduction, from movement, speech, to the use of perfumes, were taught as a true art form. But it was not only opulence and passion. Rome was a place where desire met danger. In the city's dark alleys, the Veneficae, women, sometimes men, selling love potions, aphrodisiacs, or even dangerous magic, offered promises to satisfy desire. A drop from a potion could make someone fall madly in love or lead to madness, illness, and even death. Yet, this never diminished the demand. In an empire where reputation and power were determined by both charm and manipulation, desire became a means of survival. They even turned scent into a tool. The Romans knew that seduction was not only in the body, but in fragrance. Myrrh from Arabia, flowers from Egypt, resins, and essential oils were blended to create personal signatures, a silent language of attraction. Ovid in Ars Amatoria gave detailed instructions on how to use scent, clothing, and glances to win a heart, or at least attract attention. All of this operated within a precise system where enchantment was science, desire was art, and failure could lead to loss of reputation or danger. Rome was also where the body became religion. Bacchus festivals, Lupercalia, and sexual rituals were not merely gratification of instinct. They were forms of offering, where humans connected with the divine through physical pleasure. Sex and religion merged like two sides of the same coin. A sexual act could be both a devotion, a way to wield power, and a ritual connecting with the divine. This made the Romans unashamed of desire. They saw it as part of completeness and civilization. Relationships within Lupinaria or Convivia Nocturna were vivid lessons in how power and desire coexist. A senex, while proclaiming virtue in the daytime forum, could be seduced in the darkness of the banquet, learning something about control and strategy. Every gesture, every kiss, every act of intimacy was measured against honor, influence, and the ability to manipulate society. This highlighted the Roman philosophy that power was not merely political or military tools, but the capacity to control the emotions and desires of others. Finally, Rome demonstrated that desire was a symbol of life, culture, and power. In a city where every sense was engaged, where desire was not just entertainment, but a language, Rome transformed body, perfume, wine, and light into instruments for building society. Desire became architecture, power became ritual, and worldly pleasures were both religion and politics. Rome did not merely learn to live, Rome learned to turn pleasure into the art of living. But even when Rome fell beneath fire and dust, the refinement of desire did not vanish. It transformed, integrating into the new civilizations that the great city had touched through war, trade, and culture. When the ruins of burned villas and streets littered with ash remained, stories of orgies, of luxurious lupinaria, and of powerful courtesans were still whispered. People across the Mediterranean, from Alexandria to Antioch, did not forget the scents of flowers, the lavish feasts, and the secret kisses, for they became vivid memories, legends preserved through education, poetry, and art. Letters, graffiti, and the poetry of Ovid, Propertius, and Tibullus spread like sparkling light across the centuries, teaching later generations that desire is a timeless language, capable of building or destroying, of saving or annihilating. In post-Roman cities, merchants, nobles, and sometimes even clerics looked to the Roman legacy and learned. They copied the management of desire from maintaining public baths in the old style to organizing private banquets where body and intellect were judged side by side. A skillful woman was not only beautiful but also understood philosophy, music, poetry, and politics. She became the center of every gathering, captivating hearts while subtly manipulating power. This was the continuation of Rome's spirit, where desire was not merely a pastime, but an art and a political instrument. Wine festivals, sexual rituals, and lavish banquets gradually became templates for medieval European culture. Beneath the surface of strict Christianity, Roman philosophies of pleasure still seeped through paintings, books, and architecture. French, Italian, and Spanish castles were adorned with frescoes, sculptures, and banquet halls where knowledge, music, and the body converged. Powerful women, sometimes nobles, sometimes artists, became symbols of managed and harnessed desire, like the Roman courtesans of the past. But like Rome, that desire was a double-edged sword. When luxury exceeded control, when desire became an expression of power rather than joy, society began to tremble. History proves that no empire, however militarily or economically mighty, can endure if desire turns toxic. Rome nurtured desire into a mechanism for life, yet simultaneously fostered its own destruction. Later generations, while learning from art, poetry, and architecture, faced the same temptation: how to enjoy desire without being consumed by it. From the 16th century onward, European art looked back to ancient Rome for inspiration. Renaissance painting, from Raphael to Titian, captured the human body in a state of perfection, both physical and spiritual, both pleasure and intellect. These works praised not only beauty, but also power and wisdom, reflecting how Rome taught the world that desire could become a symbol of knowledge, authority, and art. These paintings extended the legend of courtesans, powerful women who once enchanted emperors, and of Lupinaria, where the body was religion, the body was politics, the body was art. The remarkable thing is that though Rome lost its power, Roman desire endured. It permeated culture, language, and art, reviving the sensation of an empire where every smile, every touch, and every glance carried force. From the splendid corridors of Pompeii through plays and poetry to the banquets of the Renaissance, the idea of Rome, with all its desire, power, and artistry, remains present. It reminds humanity that the body and emotions are not weaknesses, but tools for understanding and mastering the world. The modern world is not exempt from this legacy. Even as bustling cities like New York, Paris, or Tokyo arise, symbols of desire, luxury, and power are reenacted. Spas, clubs, cultural events where intellect, art, and the body converge. Every festival, exhibition, and lavish space carries the echo of Rome, reminding us that the art of seduction remains a human instinct. Humans continually seek to beautify, control, and enchant through writing, painting, architecture, or modern rituals, and this is Rome's greatest inheritance. Rome, though fallen, taught humanity one thing: desire is not the enemy. It is language, strategy, art, and sometimes a weapon. Later generations learned to enjoy, regulate, and turn it into a tool to influence the world. Roman desire transcended walls, luxury, and vice, becoming an immortal symbol of humanity, the union of power, art, knowledge, and the body. When we look at the ruins from Pompeii to Rome or reread the poetry of Ovid and Propertius, it is clear that though power may vanish, though empires may collapse, desire endures. It lives in imagination, in art, and in human history. It reminds us that every kingdom, no matter how mighty, must face desire, and how humanity confronts desire is the true measure of civilization.